Dance around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
And here we go. It is On the Ledger, Ontario Politics Podcast. Dave Trafford here with you, and it is the morning of May the 7th, just before 9 o'clock. And around the table, let's get to it. Kathleen Wynne is here, former Premier of Ontario. John Wright is our resident pollster. Keith Leslie is here, and you see and hear him on CHTV and a variety of other podcasts. Been sitting in this chair, though, for, well, since 2018, maybe? You've been here a while.
Something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, here we go. Tim Hudak had a last-minute flight he had to catch at this hour, so unable to join us this week. So there's lots to talk about. And first of all, I think, Keith, it was last week we talked a lot about the need for the Premier to sort of lie low, just to, kind of stay out of the spotlight. Did that fairly successfully. And then came back, guns a-blazing on Monday, busy schedule, was at a number of public events. But, of course, the first questions were about his polls, were about the jet. So the quiet week just didn't benefit him necessarily in terms of him being able to get away from the issues that were bogging him, dragging him down a week and a half ago now.
No, and he was really, really obviously very testy. You're focused on that. We're moving the economy forward. We're doing blah, 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 blah. You're talking about that. It's so far in the past. His talking points aren't working. I mean, both he and Peter Becklenfeld tried this. We're moving forward. And they were trying this when asked about the receipts for the gravy plane. What are the brokerage fees? What will show us the paperwork on this one? Same with the FOI. What are you hiding? Why is this legislation being retroactive? What is in there? There were some very specific Greenbelt files that were in the process of being released that were stopped by your government's pushing this through at the last minute. And he just gets angry and says, well, we're moving forward. We're looking at this. People are not concerned about that. They're concerned about the economy. They're concerned about jobs. This is what we're focused on. Well, those talking points work to a little bit, but they're not addressing. He's just ignoring the key issues, which are basically these embarrassments, these huge missteps, the self-inflicted wound of the gravy plane. Show us the receipts. The opposition parties aren't going to let go of this in the legislature for sure until we see some actual receipts where we see it didn't cost anything. Right now, it's beginning to look a bit like Trump's ballroom that was going to be 400, 200 million, 300, 400 million, all paid for by his supporters. And now we see the Republicans are asking for $1 billion to get the ballroom completed. What are we doing here? What is Ford doing with all this? So I think these are self-inflicted wounds. He's got to address them. He's got to release those receipts. We need to see some paperwork on this, and I suspect there were some hefty brokerage fees. The normal brokerage fees on the sale of a plane like this is somewhere between 3% and 5%. There was a sale and a resale within a week. What were the brokerage fees on this? I think the taxpayers deserve to know this because it was a dumb move to begin with. So I think Ford is taking it on the chin. I mean, the week off away from the microphones probably did him a little bit of good, but we know the poll numbers are down, and they're going to continue to go down unless he comes up with some better talking points or some better answers on why this FOI legislation needs to be retroactive and come up with the receipts on this stupid purchase of that plane.
So let's start with the plane because I think that was the focus of a rather testy scrum outside his office.
We're focused on one thing, okay? People are concerned about affordability. They're concerned about jobs. That's what we're focused on because we know the foundation of everything.
They're also concerned about how their taxpayer dollars are being spent, Premier. They're also concerned about how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. So what's the holdup? Why not release these receipts?
They are concerned about making sure they have a secure job, making sure we give them affordability. By giving them the tax cuts, the 375,000 small businesses, we're concerned about reducing their taxes by 30% to create more jobs, more opportunities. We're working very, very hard to be competitive around the world, and we're doing it. That's what we're doing.
Premier, you have the power to put this issue to rest by simply releasing, at the stroke of a pen, you can release anything in this government.
Yeah,
why wouldn't you just release those documents right away? You know something, Colin? We're focusing on the economy. That's what we're doing. I appreciate and we're gonna that. And we're going to get and we're going to do two things. We are going to get that out to you, and then we'll deal with the next issue.
Well, dealing with the next issue is kind of the challenge for the Premier at this point, John, just because, I mean, you heard his comms person there. Last question, we just shut this down because it's getting out of hand. And Keith's right. It was self-inflicted. You heard Colin DeMello in that scrum saying, you could fix this right now. Just tell us what the details are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what is in that receipt, and we don't know. We may never know, depending upon how they play this out. But look, I mean, they reset the agenda and the talking points and everything last Wednesday. I mean, it takes a while for this to get underway. Secondly, these are the questions that are asked until the next big issue comes around. And I don't know what that'll be, but guess what? Politics from week to week can blow certain issues right off the front page. And yeah, it will be in the background, and yes, it will be there. And yes, there will be demands for some of those things, but it may be self-inflicted, but it is what it is. I think what changed is a more disciplined Premier, a quiet-spoken Premier, a Premier who is now back on a message which, you know, talks about trade and the economy and taxes, and we are about to be hit with a wave of inflation. I mean, people just don't understand what is happening in Asia and other parts of the world where entire corporations are failing. I mean, we saw Spirit Airlines literally drop out of the skies last week because of the cost of jet fuel. Things are collapsing across Europe. We are insulated in Canada and the United States because of what we have under the ground and what we can consume. But the world is in huge crises at the moment, and that is all going to affect us. So, I mean, on a matter of scale, you're right, FOI issues and, you know, receipts for this can hang around and have an issue, but there will be other issues soon which completely become more important. I think those are the things I take away from this, that I saw a different Premier where the cheese was not slipping off the cracker, where every event where he was about to speak to things was not interrupted by, you know, going off script. So I think, and again, I'm just speaking from a public opinion point of view. Yes, those things matter in the legislature, but the reality and matter to the character of a campaign. But right now, only 33% of the people in this country believe that the economy is on the right track. And I've got numbers that came out yesterday on how many people are concerned about their day-to-day living and jobs, losing their jobs and things like that. I gotta say that those are the things that really matter. So it's only been a week. I suggest that we, you know, see where we are a month from now, but those issues will still be there for the Premier. The question will be whether other issues have eclipsed them.
Kathleen, as the recovering news director in the room, I watched and noticed what John noticed, but here's the other thing. The comments weren't made from behind the podium. The major exchanges this week were in media scrums. That one we had was outside his office. We'll get to the other ones that, you know, include his comments around his reflections on what Mark Stiles had to say.
You know what, Dave? It wasn't even outside his office. Keith, you might have picked this up. It was outside the caucus room.
Caucus office.
There you go.
So they caught him, and he didn't have control of that scrum, you know? He was either on his way to a caucus meeting or who knows, but he was not standing outside his office with the, you know, the flags there and all of the kind of setup. He was standing outside the caucus room, which is down the hall from the legislature. So what I see, John, I completely understand what you're saying, and I accept that the big issues are the ones that people are concerned about and affordability. I totally get that. But the optics of what's going on right now, the Premier looks back on his heels. He looks flat. He doesn't have that energy, good humor in his voice, you know? So, he's in a rough place right now. It doesn't look to me like he's having a very good time. And the optics of the questions that are being asked and the way the press are going after it, are really hurting him. You know, whatever shows up in the polling right now, he looks like he's hiding something. And that is, to me, that's the piece that's going to stick. I think that if I were advising him, which of course I don't, He doesn't call me for advice.
Really?
But I would say he did once. But I would say, give as much information as you can. Right? Like just have a calm press conference and lay out the information, or have somebody lay out the information around the jet if you can. Give it all, then lay out the process whereby you're going to do that. But, the bottom line for him is he cannot wait till Christmas break or till the summer break. And they're almost there. They've got a week and a bit or something left, and they just want to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Keith, I talked to a freelance journalist. His name is Paul Webster this week, and he's been covering specifically a lot around the 413, 413 development and the idea of building that highway and so on. And to, sort of build on the questions around where did the money go for the jet, he and I guess it was the information commissioner, they went to court to actually have some of those details released, because the government had said, well, no, it's cabinet privilege. We don't want to release, right? We don't want to release these details. There's in terms of who was involved in the sales or how much was being spent and all of those sorts of things. So when you talk to him, and this is a guy who's putting up his own money to be part of this court proceeding, it's the same pattern in terms of the lack of transparency and the amount of money that the government is spending to fight him and their own information commissioner is extraordinary. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So back to Kathleen's point, it creates this image of, somebody really working hard to hide something.
What are you hiding? It just comes right down to that basic question. Everything we've seen from this government that gets them into trouble seems to be where they're rewarding friends and donors. That just comes straight up to it. And this is just yet another example of that seemingly behavior by this government. Cold in its crass, and it's the type of thing that does stick with the government. The Premier, we were talking about his missteps, and I didn't mention the other one that I wanted to get on, which was the one before the legislative break, which was when he attacked Stephanie Smythe, the Liberal MP, with a very personal attack in the legislature. There were calls for him to apologize, and apparently during the legislative break, he did call up Stephanie and apologize. But I think it's something he should have repeated in the legislature. He made the slanderous attack against her in the legislature. He should have apologized in the House, put it on the record, put it unanswered. And he didn't. And I think that was a blown chance. That's a real simple, easy opportunity for him to show, you know what, I went a little too far. He just has to apologize. So when Merritt Stiles, the NDP leader, went at him this week and talked about him ending up in prison, he just came back, well, that's Trumpian rhetoric. We don't want to engage in that kind of. And as Martin Redcon pointed out in the Star, he managed to say that with a straight face. Because the Trumpian rhetoric has been coming mostly from his side when we do see it. But the government here, they're just hanging themselves out by seemingly picking preferences of friends and donors and people who are just too closely tied. And when it gets down to people wanting to find out more information, they take legislative steps to block the access. And again, this freedom of information legislation, I know people, it's not a dinner table issue for most people. But don't you want to know why your government thinks it shouldn't have access to any information going back to 1988? What the hell? That's a rather arbitrary year. What is this, the core behind all this? What are they trying to hide from us overall? And it comes right back to that very thing that Kathleen Wynne just said and that you said, Dave. What are you hiding? And all of this comes back to it. What are you hiding? Why are you fighting so hard in court against your own legislative officials who say this should be released? This should be. Is it really just all about the Premier's cell phone records? No. There's more going on here, and people are going to keep asking that question until we get some better answers.
But pardon me for not knowing about the specific case, but are not cabinet documents, decisions, and what goes on behind those cabinet doors before what has been done by the Ford government, are they not confidential?
Sure they are, but in this case, particularly what they have said.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, if you want to go and subpoena or ask for cabinet decisions on certain things, I mean, it's not the Ford government who would fight that. It would be everybody who would fight that in every premier's office across the country. So I'm not diminishing the fact that there are issues under FOI that may be thwarted because of what's happened. Number two, that this is a characterization that's going to haunt them. And number three, there's no way right now to get access to that information, and so they may run out the clock. I'm not diminishing that. But there is freedom of information that had backstops to this to issues before the government increased those obstacles.
But there's no maybe about them using this to block information. The Trillium had specific requests on the Greenbelt that they were told were about to be released to them on the Friday. The legislation was given royal assent on the Friday. Come Monday, they got a notice. These documents will not be released to you. This is on specific Greenbelt stuff. Of course, we know there's a police investigation into the Greenbelt. The OPP handed it over to the RCMP, and we had nothing but crickets since then. The government seems able to skate on this without a whole lot of public attention. But I think, again, what are you hiding? All these changes seem to be the government hiding something, and this is just another key thing where they raise more questions than they answer, and it's easily answered if they wanted to put the policy there to tell people what's going on.
On the 413, though, John, on the 413 issue, though, the Accountability Commissioner had already said these are not subject to cabinet confidentiality. They are administrative documents that should be made public and allowed to be reviewed. And they went to the Court of Appeal for this. So these are things that do not fall within the restrictions that are already laid out in the new legislation. So they're taking it a step beyond that in this respect.
Well, I suppose. I mean, if you were sitting in power and there was a police investigation on, I mean, you would basically say, well, let the process unfold. We haven't got anything to hide, and you would wait. And I mean, the fact that we've heard crickets from the RCMP is up to the RCMP. It's not up to the politicians. So again, I think these are all going to be character assessments. I wonder whether we're going to be in the same place in September or October of this year when there's huge other issues that we're going to be dealing with, because you can plot the time frame from the Straits of Hormuz to our kitchen tables and the potential. You're going to see in July gas stations in this city, if they don't solve something in the next 30 days, going dry. So, I mean, all of this is really interesting. And it's of the moment. But I tell you, in the next few weeks, that people won't care about this. They may during an election campaign years from now. But as I said, I'm not trying to block out what you're saying. I just think that there's going to be some significant issues, and this will be in the backdrop. And we'll see how he handles the next stage, and see where the numbers go.
Yeah, John. Sorry, Dave. I agree with what you're saying. And if this government, while all this was going on around the freedom of information and the Greenbelt and all of it, skills development, if they were working very hard to support kids with special needs, if they were, putting more support into hospitals, if they were doing the things that really affect people's lives, if they were working with the families of kids with autism, if they were really bearing down on those things that make a big difference in people's day-to-day lives, I think all of us would feel differently about this. But they're not doing those things. They're not doing those things, and they're hiding, or it looks like they're hiding information on these other issues. So I think it's the combination of those things that is going to come back to bite them, or is going to bite them right through until the election. Because it's not like we're getting in this province, in my opinion, good governance and a government that has maybe made some missteps. We're getting obfuscation on issues, and we're not getting a response to the issues that people are really struggling with in their day-to-day lives. So I think the mix of those realities makes it very difficult to be sympathetic.
With a campaign 3 years from now.
Well, okay, yeah, fair enough. Campaign 3 years from now, but 3 years, let me tell you, goes quickly.
Yeah.
And people, we can say that individuals don't have long memories, but the media have very long memories. Party backroom people have long memories. Ads get made. People get reminded about the things that have gone on over those 3 years. 3 years is not a long time.
Even the 413, Dave, there's been remarkably little controversy about the lands that were picked for that route and about the changes that have been made, benefiting, again, some of the very same faces and names that we've seen in previous projects where they benefit from this government. Same thing again. I don't know how it doesn't come back, how the government is able to skate on all these really close links to the same sort of developers and projects with the 413 and with other large-scale projects that they're doing. The appearance here, again, is of favoritism, of people getting rewarded for being close ties or having close ties with the progressive conservative government or with Doug Ford. And the unfairness of it all. I think, though, that the 413 could actually become an election issue because, in all likelihood, there's not going to be a shovel in the ground between now and then. Or if they get it there, we'll find out what's the route and how's the route and change, and people will find out more and more about it. There's a lot more to be found out, I think, about this particular project, including, the traffic studies. We see it's just not going to save that much time for the cost involved here.
Including and fundamentally that we don't need it. I mean, that's why it was shelved by me when I was Minister of Transportation and then by Del Duca when I was Premier, because there was not a good case for it. There were things that could be done with the QEW to increase the efficiency of that road. You know, the 413 is not a necessary road. And at one point, municipalities along the route were all saying, we don't want this. We don't need this. I don't know. They may have changed their tune now, but it was not a road that was going to have an easy path to fruition anyway.
Well, the road may not be being built yet, John, but there are already developments that are anticipating the road being built. So whether it's large facilities, whether it's a big Walmart or some storage facility, there's already betting that's going on based on this talk around 413. And the interesting thing in terms of the way this conversation is going is all of these things get conflated. The 413 gets conflated with all of the FOI requests about everything except and including the Greenbelt and so on and so forth. So to me, it just becomes one. I realize it's maybe not the kitchen table issue, but it becomes one big sticky ball of stuff that they're going to have to deal with. It's rolling downhill faster than ever.
Well, hopefully not to be repetitive in what I've said not only this week, but last week. I don't disagree that this bag of or ball of goo is a ball of goo, and it's going to stick to them somehow. And it'll be there for a campaign if Doug Ford, in fact, is still premier then and not another leader, for them to deal with. Okay, so we're like, all right, that's fine. They're going to get out of the legislature. We're going to move on to the summer, and we're going to have other issues, and we'll see how long it hangs around. But yeah, they've created all of these things. If the RCMP decides not to do anything, well, then it hangs out there. Maybe they issue a statement saying there's nothing here to do, and there you go. So take that characterization, put it on the side for a moment. The only other thing I would add to all of this is if you take a look at Ottawa right now, and the Liberal numbers in Ontario are conflated because of that. I'm inflated because of that. There is no effective leader of Her Majesty's opposition in the province of Ontario. I mean, you have Merritt Stiles, who's out there, and she's doing her thing, and, she's still stuck at 17% in the polls, maybe as high as 20%. But the Liberals have an opportunity to provide a person who can lead them into the new land. And, you look at Prime Minister Carney, he has the numbers he has in many respects because Pierre Poilievre is not the choice across, those two sword lanes. So I guess the point I would make is, yes, all of these things are going to hang around, but they're not sticking in a way that you would think because there is no effective leader. I mean, John Fraser is very good for the Liberals, but we'll see whether or not the Liberals are smart enough to elect somebody who's going to have that gravitas to give an alternative to the people of Ontario, because right now we're not seeing it through that lens. So the fall will be big. It'll be big because we'll be able to have some of those judgments, and the fall will be big because we'll get to see what big issues we're all having to deal with.
Can I just throw in a couple of other reasons the fall is going to be big? We've got a municipal campaign going on, and I think that there will be lots of councillor and mayoral candidates who will be running against Doug Ford, right? Yep. They will be,
for sure.
Every trustee in the province is going to be running against Doug Ford because of what Doug Ford has done to the education system, not just to their jobs, but to the schools in their wards and districts. The other reason that the fall is going to be big is that we will be in the middle of bargaining with teachers. And so there's a very good chance that it will be a difficult negotiation. I don't know whether the government will be able to pull another rabbit out of the hat. COVID helped them in the last round of negotiations. I don't know what will happen, but I can tell you, teachers are not very happy. There are teachers being laid off and surplused all over the province. Class sizes are going up as a result of that. Kindergarten classes are wildly imbalanced in terms of their size because staffing models have to accommodate fewer teachers. So I think you'll see a lot of concern if there's labor action. And so the fall, that the summer will be a bit of a reprieve, but the fall is going to bring back all of the stuff we've been talking about, plus add another whole bunch of challenges to the government's outlook.
Yeah, well, and those issues, clearly the Premier's saying we're going to move on to other issues. He needs to probably is certain that those are on the horizon as well, as they're not unaware of those things. But, Keith, he started the week by saying to the media, all you guys are so focused on the polls, and it wasn't like he was dismissing the poll. He actually went on the offensive and said, if we called an election today, I come back with a fourth majority. So that's what the polls mean right now. And that's what prompted Marit Stiles' response.
Don't worry about it, Doug, because when I'm Premier, I'm going to call a public inquiry into all of this, and we're going to get our hands on all of that. And you know what? Maybe you won't get another mandate because you'll be in prison, Doug. Yeah. When we call a public inquiry, which is what it took to get to the bottom of some of the questions around other governments, I think it's a lot of terrible stuff is going to come out. Why is the Premier hiding all of this information from the people of Ontario? Why doesn't he want anybody to know what's on his phone? Because there's dirty dealings around the Greenbelt. The RCMP is investigating him, and I would be very surprised if at the end of this there might very well be charges laid. Absolutely. I mean, look, other governments have had people end up behind bars for less than this.
But that Trump-style rhetoric is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. It's not about me. It's about the rhetoric that happens down here at Queen's Park and outside of Queen's Park. But she doesn't have to apologize, whatever she wants to do. But we aren't going to lower ourselves to the Trump-style rhetoric that she's spewing right now.
You had really intense. You had really to that divisive rhetoric at all?
I'm sorry?
Do you feel like you've contributed to that divisive rhetoric?
Yeah, inside the legislature, words get said, but that one was over the top. And yes, we go back and forth, but she stepped over the line.
You had a really intense rhetoric against Kathleen Wynne when you were running against her in 2018. Some stuff talking about that people from her administration had gone to jail. Why is this different?
Yeah, well, we're in government now and campaigns. You go back and forth, but now we're running government, and I think everyone should get together and collaborate when we can. I understand they're the official opposition, but you can talk about different debates in the different.
Well, peace, love, and understanding, Kathleen, is really where we're going with that. And I don't want to rehash the whole issue around the FOI, but I think more or less that whole conversation and exchange was around the tone at Queen's Park. And I thought it was interesting this week. It wasn't just about Queen's Park, that it kind of blew up in Manitoba as well, where the Speaker of the House there, the legislature said, I'm banning a number of words because it was getting so nasty and personal, and it's not productive in terms of the way we should be having our political discourse. We can disagree, certainly, but was Marit Stiles over the line? We all agree that the Premier went over the line talking about Stephanie Smythe. The tone of the conversation right now is what's wearisome.
Yeah, I mean, it just, you have to know, it amuses me to hear the current Premier talking about civility and, people going over the line. Look, I don't like what Marit said particularly, but I sure don't like what Doug Ford said in the legislature to Stephanie. I don't like any of it, and I don't think it helps to clarify for people of the province what's going on. But I have to, I do have to say that this is not about whether Doug Ford will stoop to what Marit Stiles is doing. This is about Doug Ford having set a tone from the moment he walked into the legislature, and I was there I was sitting in my seat in the legislature in 2018. And, you know, there has been an air of divisiveness and a politicization of everything, partisan politics in the legislature about every single issue since this government's been in office. So there is an element, Dave, of this government and this premier reaping what he has sown, quite frankly.
Yeah, John, you talk about what's, you know, kind of aggravating the individuals, and probably more often than not, I will hear people comment on the tone, just generally in terms of how they are, what qualifies as debate or whatever it might be. And again, I go back to what happened in Winnipeg this week, and Wab Kinew, who is, you know, elevated as the sort of the rock star among the premiers right now, he came out after the speaker's pronouncement on what was banned language in the legislature and said, hey, we're not backing down. So even the star character in the play is the guy who's saying, listen, we're not willing to necessarily change our tone in the legislature. And I just think that turns a lot of people off. We've already got enough people who aren't engaged.
Yeah, but none of this matters to the public.
Well, I think it does. I think most people listen to that tone and they think, what the hell, I'm tuning them out.
But the bigger issues are whether or not an automobile plant is going to be repurposed, or whether we're going to, you know, maybe take the jobs that used to be for, you know, manufacturing cars and instead manufacture military vehicles that are going to be sold to Sweden or something like that. I mean, what about the battery plants that, you know, that are there with the investments that we're going into that and repurpose them so that we've got, you know, mega power savings for the grid, or dealing with Trump on the trade issue and stuff like that. So, I mean, honestly, all of these things are tonality and they do matter, you know, but tell me a poll that you've ever seen that ranks politicians, you know, lower than car salesmen. I mean, the reality is that this stuff ranks very low. Politicians are usually about second or third from the bottom of it. And if you ask people, do they, you know, they scream and yell at each other and say these sort of things, the answer is yes. All I'm saying is that I think we're not cutting to the big issues that people are facing and they are going to face. When you have 78% of the people in this country saying that they are going to struggle with their day-to-day finances, when you find that 38% of the people of this country, and especially in Ontario, saying that they are struggling to make ends meet, and it's more than we've seen, when we see that there's close to 11 million people in this country who are scared about losing their job, but close to 2.5 million who believe it's imminent. I mean, this is all around the edges, and I don't blame the media for that. I also blame the politicians for not setting the agenda. But honestly, it's a little bit like Charlie Brown and the teacher. I mean, it's a lot of wah, wah, wah in the background because the substantive issues are right there. So again, I think all of these go to the character of politicians, but I don't know what, you know, it may be a lot of smoke, but I don't think it's creating much heat out there because there are other issues that are far more important to the public.
But Keith, you know that the premier will stand up in front of us and say, here's the long list of things that we have done over the last 8 years of, you know, and we've managed to do this for healthcare and this for education. And they've got their long list, and the finance minister will get up and say the same things, and Vic Fideli will say the same things, but they all get lost because what we hear is the wah, 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 and that is those kinds of, you know, ad hominem exchanges, or the tone that has nothing to do with the issue of the day that's affecting me at the kitchen table.
What struck me was in that clip you just played where the premier was reacting to Merritt Stiles, and he couldn't actually say the word apology. He stopped at Apollo. No, she doesn't have to apologize. And he just moved on because he really can't say the word in front of a camera.
It's like Fonzie.
Exactly. As for Manitoba's 5 words you can't say in the legislature anymore, that strikes me as a pretty dumb move overall. I mean, he's clearly trying to send a message, but then the governing party comes out and says, screw that. We're going to call a racist a racist if we feel that. We're going to call a racist a racist. And in reference to George Carlin, I think his 7 words you can never say on TV would be down to 5 now anyway. So I think Manitoba's on track here with something. But I get what the speaker's trying to do. He's trying to set a tone that, you know, But you can't ban those words because quite often those words, including the word liar, are used intentionally by a member knowing they're going to get thrown out of the House, but they want to send a message. And they also want the media attention of getting thrown out of the House by calling someone a liar or a racist or whatever the 5 words that they've come up with in Manitoba. Interesting attempt to restore civility, but it's going to be up to the politicians themselves. And as for complaints from school teachers that bringing the kids to watch question period is a mistake, I've heard that, I think, since the 80s. It's always been an issue. Before, of course, before the cameras came in, that's how old I'm at. Before the cameras came in the legislature, they didn't apologize for clapping. They thumped the desk all the time. And so the students used to wonder, what the hell was that all about? And then when the cameras came in, of course, that looked kind of bizarre on camera, so they switched to apologizing, or to clapping, rather. But they scream and talk over each other, and no one listens to the poor person who's asking the question. And then the government, it's a terrible example for students, and teachers soon realize that if you're going to take a class trip there, maybe avoid question period. See the legislature, learn the history of the building, maybe get to the media student and have someone come in and speak to them. But taking them through question period is a bit much for young people, I think, to cope, because I wouldn't want to be a teacher trying to control a class after having them sit through an hour of question period.
Yeah,
Dave, can I just jump in? I think I want to say something about the tone, and I want to say something about Merritt, and I'm going to do a little gender analysis here. I think that it was a mistake for Merritt to sound as hot as she did. I think that it is, I think it's a lot harder for a woman, and I get to say this because, I went through many, many briefings and many looks at focus groups. It's harder for a woman to make that kind of accusation in that kind of angry tone than it is for a man. She's not going to get away with it in the same way that Ford did. I mean, again, John's right. The tone may not matter and may not have an impact, but just in terms of modeling what's needed in order to stand up to Ford and in order to be the effective opposition, I think she's left a big space for the Libs now. I mean, it was already there, but I think that getting to that point has kind of cast her in a way that is not really helpful to her as the female leader of the opposition.
Can we? I know we've got to get out of here presently, but I want to get to 2 things before we go, and one is the Honda announcement this week, Kathleen, and it's indefinitely been suspended in terms of the EV production. It was a $15 billion plant that was on track. And, everybody's talking about, well, there's no market for the EVs. And we were just in Europe, and the EVs are all over the place. The EU has invested in the infrastructure where there's no problem with range. I realize there's a difference with the climate, and cold winters can have an effect on the battery life here in Canada. This again suggests to me that we put the cart way out in front of the horse on this one, because before we were willing to say, here's the infrastructure we're going to invest in, we started investing in or subsidizing or giving cash to incentives to firms to come to build the EV when we didn't have the infrastructure for the range on. I know we've talked a little bit about this, but it really is indicating to me poor vision in terms of down the road, metaphorically, in terms of where we were going to be with this. And now finally they've come around to the idea, well, maybe we should be investing in hybrids. Mm-hmm. This to me shows real problems, probably an underlying real issue with the automotive, because we don't seem to have any stability in where we want to go with this industry now.
Well, I don't know if that question was targeted at me, but I just want to say something about this. I'm sitting in Alliston right now, so this is the community that my grandkids are growing up in, and I think what's really changed, Dave, everything you said is true. We didn't get the infrastructure built. When Ford came in, he stopped the process. There was work that was being done. He didn't believe in electric vehicles in 2018. He believes in them now, but he didn't believe in them then. So there was a stalling of the process of the infrastructure build, and he canceled the rebates and so on. So the market wasn't allowed to grow. Maybe it wouldn't have grown as much as it needed to anyway, but Still, there was a pause. Now they've started up again. But the real thing that has happened, and in all the articles I read about this, Japan is worried about CUSMA. They're worried about access to the American market. That's what this is about. So whether it's a hybrid or whether it's an electric vehicle, I don't think we're going to see growth in the auto industry until we get CUSMA settled. That's what's going on. And I can tell you, when I went on trade missions, I was selling the region. I was selling Ontario, but I was selling access to the Great Lakes region. I was selling free trade with the United States. That was the hook to get foreign investment into Ontario. So all of that has changed with Trump 2.0.
John?
That last line says it all. Who would have predicted 2 years ago that we'd be where we are today, where you can't send foreign-made automobiles across the border? Well, of course you're going to have Honda or any other manufacturer reconsider what they're going to do. I mean, we're in a totally different world, where we were looking at 2035 to do away with, regular gas cars and make them all electric and invest in all of this stuff and batteries and everything under the Obama regime and then into the Biden regime. I mean, of course, we all set our course in that direction. And some guy south of the border who doesn't even respect the current CUSMA. I mean, it doesn't matter what's in there. He just does whatever he wants. He gets up at 2:00 in the morning and decides that, we got to deal with Iran, and the next hour says, well, I don't think so, but, and the price of gas and oil are going up. I mean, honestly, we live in a completely different world. If we are going to survive in this world, we are going to have to hitch our wagon to the Mark Carney bandwagon. That's the reality, because he is opening doors everywhere. I mean, we had this huge announcement on the manufacturing front of airplanes and airframes in this country, the biggest ever in the last 48 hours. It's kind of like, yeah, we're starting to see that. So if anything, Doug Ford's been spending a lot of time in the United States, and he's been trying, talking about Republicans, trying to get them on board and do all that sort of stuff. I'll be the first to say, despite the fact it's going to cost a lot to fly, he should be going to Europe. I mean, our markets have completely shifted. The automobile plants are going to take a while to tune up, but they're now ready for hybrids because that's where the market's going to be. But who would have predicted 2 years ago that the earth would have changed the way it is? And I can't blame the politicians for that. What I would blame them for going forward in the next year is if they don't start to pivot, then they're leaving all of that stuff unused, because it can be retrofit. It can be used. They just have to find the right market for it, but it's not south of the border. That's for sure.
Well, Keith, when we look at it from that perspective, though, we could have insulated ourselves from some of this in terms of, for example, the EV markets, if we had been better prepared and it was a more muscular market. Period. And we weren't prepared for that. So it was of our own makings to some degree in terms of the risk that we have put the auto sector at.
How could we have been prepared when in 2018 Doug Ford he not just was opposed to EVs at the time, he ripped the chargers out of the GO stations that had been installed.
Well, you make my point.
Yeah, the consumers are going, what the hell is going on here? Why would we want to get invested in this? And then a few years later, he's going to give $250 million to an EV battery plant. It makes sense. I've become a convert. My brother has the Mustang Mach-E, the fully electric Mustang, and I'm really bowled over by the self-driving feature. I really like the self-driving feature, and it's just stunning. And so I've been checking out other cars and others which come with these features, other electric vehicles. And what I've found out right now is if you want to make a car dealer in Atlantic Canada cry, call him up and ask him if he's got a new EV you can buy. Because none of them ordered any in this year. Right. None of them. They were just so afraid they didn't see the Straits of Hormuz coming, but the consumers have, and they've been calling up daily, what have you got for EVs? What have you got for, and not the hybrids. I know two of our panelists here have the hybrids, but a lot of people, once they go fully EV, and remember, my brother's just had his 20,000 kilometer checkup. They filled the windshield wiper. There's nothing else to do. There's like 3 parts in an EV. And where there's 341 in a combustion engine. So once people go EV fully, and once they realize the apps tell you where to charge, how long you need to charge, where you're going to be, they all of a sudden, why the hell would I ever go back to gas? And then that's not counting the $1.95 gas that was all this sort of craziness. So I think the market will change itself underneath us, but Donald Trump has, of course, screwed the EV market and just undermined it completely. It undermined clean energy overall, really. But I think it will recover, and I think the next administration, hopefully, even if it's a Republican, will see the sense in that electric vehicles are the future. And the hybrids, I mean, are really, you're carrying around two combustion system. I mean, two engine, it's just not necessary. So I think the EVs will come here. They'll be there. But even the dealers themselves aren't ready to jump on yet. It's just not there, the support. So, they're betting with their dollars, right? They're betting on it, and they just didn't make the bet in Atlantic Canada this year. So all the cars I'm looking at are basically in Ontario, and they at least will give me shipping fees to get them back down here. But EVs, I think they're the future. The Honda thing, Honda's not big into EVs yet. This was going to be their forte into it. Other companies have gone whole hog in. This was going to be theirs. So if they pause another year, I don't think that's a big shock to anybody. There was a year ago that they put the pause on this. They're reviewing it. We haven't had the official word yet, but I suspect it will come that they're certainly not going to tool up there for an EV battery plant or an EV plant within the next year.
Just
I'm
before
still
we
driving
go,
my 2006 Ford Focus.
Yeah, just before we go, we're days away from the by-election in Scarborough Southwest. Kathleen Wynne, any predictions?
Oh, I'm not going to make a fearless prediction, but I know at least one of the local candidates who was our candidate last time, and it's a pretty unhappy situation. As an Ontario Liberal, I don't like this kind of infighting. And Nate Erskine-Smith has made a lot of enemies. So it'll be very interesting to see, because if he does prevail, Dave, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of support he will get in the actual by-election, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing that he's setting himself up for. So, I'll be watching with interest is all I can say.
Yeah, John, it's interesting. I mean, everybody's kind of looking at this as if he wins this nomination, he's a lock to be the leader. There's a couple of steps in between that are going to be fairly critical.
Yeah, I got no predictions on this. I got no polls in the field. I got no horse in this race. All I could say is if you are coming in from elsewhere and you're saying that you're going to represent a region you've never really had any association with, you run the risk of getting pummeled. And you got candidates out there. I know, we've heard the arguments that there's paid staffers working on this stuff. I mean, it's and about the list being cleaned, that's all below the surface. The reality here is that if you have a carpetbagger arrive, then he might get packed out by the end of the election campaign. So we'll see what happens, but you got to be part of something in order to be elected to something. And I'm not really sure he meets the criteria.
And a wise advisor said to me once, Rod McDonald, who worked at Queen's Park, he said to me, whoever everyone thinks is going to be the leader, that's not the person who's going to be the leader.
Well, look at Dalton McGuinty. What hour was Dalton McGuinty chosen, and after how many?
4 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. But Keith, it's almost as if this is a micro version of the leadership in terms of anyone but Nate.
Well, that's it. If you come in with your elbows up like that within your own party, you're going to get some blowback, and you're going to get. He created two sides essentially in this. It's him or anybody but him, and that's how it's going to play out inside. It'd be interesting to see how it does. Is name recognition all that matters in these things? Not in the local Liberals association picking their candidate. No, I think once it gets to a by-election and broader, perhaps. But once the Liberals, they all know all the parties equally. I think they know what they're up against here. So I think he's got a tough road to hoe on Saturday. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, because he's been touted as. You say some people seem to talk as if he's got a lock on the leadership if he wins this. It's a long way from that, but he is touted as a leadership candidate. And some people like that idea. That's something that they would want to vote for, get behind. But that's assuming an awful lot. There's many big ifs in there at that point. So I think Saturday is going to be very telling, and it'll be interesting. I mean, if he really was convicted or convinced that behind his conviction, that
there you go,
going to win this, he would have resigned his seat in Parliament. He wouldn't have hung out, he would have thrown all in at this point, and he's not all in because he doesn't know for sure he's going to win this. So it's going to be very interesting to think. I think the anybody but Nate thing may in the end prevail.
Yeah, well, it's worth remembering that the Liberals finished third in the last election in that riding. So even, again, the name recognition is one thing, but if the name recognition amounts to mud, not really all that great. All right, let's leave it there, shall we? Kathleen Wynne, John Wright, Keith Leslie, thank you for joining us. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. And as I alluded to, did a few other interviews this week that we're going to drop into the feed upcoming. One is a really interesting conversation I had with the head of school at Pickering College. Her name is Dr. Cindy Locke, and she's talking about their approach to educating kids, and it's a whole new view of the curriculum, and it's not test-oriented. And this is the woman who was involved with developing the standardized math tests across the province at one point. But they've got a curriculum that's set up where the students pretty much self-direct, but they had a really interesting project where they went in and they actually solved a homeless issue in Durham region. And they actually made their presentation to a local politician who voted against a shelter in that region. But once he heard their presentation, he thought, maybe I voted the wrong way. They've changed minds. Yeah, it's a fascinating, and the learning that these kids are having, it's really an interesting approach. So it's the future of school she talks about. Not schooling, not education, the future of school. So we'll drop that in the feed. That's coming up here on The Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford. Have a great weekend.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.